I didn't sleep the night after Melanie's email. It wasn't the tone falsely sweet padded with legalese and faux concern that kept me awake. It was the implication, the gall, the quiet assumption that my life, my history, my grief were footnotes to some collective entitlement. I sat in the breakfast nook, Aunt Nora's favorite spot, with her chipped teacup in my hands, staring at the eucalyptus branches she used to hang in the window for their scent. I could almost hear her. "They only remember you when there's something to gain." She'd said it once about her cousin who tried to borrow money after 30 years of silence. I hadn't understood the bitterness then. I do now. By morning, I had made up my mind. I called Eli not for financial advice, but for connections. He referred me to a legal firm that specialized in estate defense and undue influence cases. Within 48 hours, I had an appointment. I gathered every document I had, Nora's will notarized in 2018 hospital records, naming me next of kin photographs from holidays where no one from the bloodline was present. Even the handwritten birthday cards Aunt Nora had sent me every year, the ones that began, "To my girl," and ended with "All my heart, Nora." That week, I also spoke with Reverend Monroe. He had officiated Nora's memorial and had known her longer than I had. He looked at me, his lined face solemn, and said, "That house wasn't just a gift, it was a testament. Anyone who disputes it doesn't know what legacy means." His words steadied me. But Diane and Melanie weren't done. 2 weeks after the party, I received a registered letter formal notice that they were petitioning to challenge the will, their claim that I had exerted undue influence over a frail elderly woman. I read it 3 times before laughter bubbled up sharp and humorless. The same people who hadn't visited her once in 5 years were accusing me of manipulation. I had spoon-fed Nora pureed peas and wiped blood from her gums when her mouth ulcers returned. Where were they when I sat up for 3 nights straight during her final pneumonia? The next day, Lena showed up. She had a duffel bag in one hand and tear tracks still drying on her cheeks. "They cut me off," she said simply. "Told me if I stayed in touch with you, the tuition was gone." I opened my arms and she collapsed into them. We spent that night in the den sorting through a photo box. Nora with Lena at age 5 baking snickerdoodles. Nora holding Lena's graduation cap. "She raised me too," Lena whispered. "Not just you." It wasn't said to comfort me, it was a declaration soft but unwavering. In that moment, I stopped seeing myself as a victim of their aggression. I began to see myself as the keeper of a truth they couldn't rewrite. Still, the days that followed were difficult. Melanie began posting vaguely on Facebook, alluding to betrayals within the family. Diane emailed mutual friends with insinuations enough to plant doubt, not enough to be legally defamatory. My inbox filled with questions from church acquaintances. "What's going on? Are you okay?" The community, once silent, began to murmur. And I, who had always lived quietly, who never posted more than garden updates and church bake sale photos, was forced to defend my existence. So I did. I hosted a second dinner. Smaller. Intentional. I invited people who had known Nora, her bridge partner from years ago, her former nurse from the rehab center, even the realtor who had sold her the house in the 80s. I didn't explain, I didn't rant. I simply set the table with Nora's favorite porcelain, served her lemon chicken recipe, and displayed a gallery of photos and letters documenting a lifetime of shared history. Toward the end of the evening, I read aloud from Nora's last Christmas letter, written in shaky cursive. "This house is Carol's because she is mine. No blood could make her more so." There were tears, there was silence, and when Reverend Monroe stood to speak, he said, "If this were a court of spirit, there would be no case to argue." Still, the legal case loomed. My attorney warned me it would be long, possibly draining, but she also said their chances were slim. "They're grasping," she told me, "but people who grasp can still damage. We'll be thorough." Meanwhile, Lena insisted on staying. "They don't define me," she said. "Not anymore." We repurposed the upstairs guest room for her studies. She began volunteering at a local shelter. I could see her blooming not in defiance, but in freedom. I too began to change. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. I walked the beach every morning at 6, Aunt Nora's old knit shawl around my shoulders. I planted herbs with Lena in spring and learned how to use video calls so we could show off our harvest to friends. The house, once a fortress of grief, became a living space again. But then 3 months in, I received another letter. This one wasn't legal. It was handwritten on monogrammed paper. From Diane. The opening line made my breath hitch. I've been thinking about what I said, and maybe not all of it was fair. She asked to meet. Alone, said she'd be in town for a wedding and wanted to talk face to face. I haven't responded yet. Not because I'm afraid or even angry, but because I know that forgiveness is no longer something I owe freely. It's something earned, and I'm no longer interested in bending backwards for people who only look for you when there's something to claim. Still, there's a part of me, the Carol who once baked extra lemon bars for church potlucks, the nurse who always said yes to the double shift, The girl who just wanted to be chosen, who wonders if maybe, just maybe, some bridges shouldn't burn. But that's a decision for another day. Because tomorrow Lena and I are repainting the living room. We picked a shade called Heritage Blue. She says it looks like the sky just after a storm. And I think that's exactly right. I waffles. Waited 4 days before replying to Diane's letter. It sat on the sideboard next to the bay window between a faded ceramic owl Aunt Nora had bought at a flea market and a dried bouquet of rosemary from our old garden. I looked at it every morning during coffee, letting the words echo in my mind. Maybe not all of it was fair. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it also wasn't the kind of message one sends lightly, especially from a woman like Diane, who, in all the years I'd known her, had rarely acknowledged fault unless it came with a caveat and a martyr's sigh. When I finally called her, my voice was steadier than I expected. We agreed to meet at a diner halfway between our towns. Neutral ground. I wore Aunt Nora's silver bracelet, the one she gave me the week before she passed, and brought no documents, no letters, no defenses, just myself. Diane arrived 10 minutes late wearing a cream sweater set and oversized sunglasses despite the rain. She looked older than I remembered, more brittle around the eyes, more conscious of her movements. We exchanged pleasantries over coffee, but the air between us was taut with the things unsaid. Finally, she folded her hands and said, "I didn't realize how deep things went between you and Nora. I thought..." She trailed off, eyes flickering. "I thought you were just... around." I tilted my head. "I'm not around." She gave a helpless shrug. "After the divorce, I assumed you stuck close for comfort. That maybe you were trying to stay connected to... us." There it was, the assumption that proximity was rooted in dependency. That my continued care for Nora was an act of clinging, not devotion. "Diane," I said slowly, "I buried my parents at 12. Nora took me in when I had no one. She didn't just give me a room, she gave me roots. You saw her once at Christmas in 2007 and called her senile because she forgot your birthday." To her credit, Diane didn't argue. She looked down at her mug and murmured, "I know." There was a long silence. Then she added, "Melanie's pushing this harder than I expected. The trust talk, the will challenge, it wasn't all my idea." That surprised me. Diane, for all her abrasiveness, had always liked to be the orchestrator. That she'd allowed herself to be swept along or claimed as much spoke volumes. "She's angry," she continued. "Feels like the family's legacy is disappearing." "She never built it," I replied, too tired for diplomacy. "Legacy isn't about names in a registry. It's about the people who show up." We sat with that truth. Eventually, Diane asked if Lena was still with me. When I nodded, her expression softened. "Tell her, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dragged her into this." That at least felt genuine. I left the diner not with closure, but with a sense of realignment. Diane wasn't my enemy, not truly. She was just one more woman shaped by decades of expectation, scarcity, and quiet disappointments reaching for control in the only way she knew. But the complications didn't end there. 2 weeks later, I received notice of a preliminary hearing. The will was being contested officially now. Melanie had secured an aggressive attorney, one of those smooth-voiced litigators who specialized in inheritance disputes and high-tension family drama. My own lawyer, Miranda, was calm but firm. "It won't go far," she said. "But the Retaliation, they're trying to wear you down." At the same time, something else shifted. The community started talking, not whispering, not speculating, but openly asking questions. A local columnist wrote a piece about elder care will exploitation and the gendered burden of family caregiving. Though it didn't name names, it quoted Reverend Monroe and mentioned a coastal house where a woman had nursed her aunt to the end only to be called a thief. It spread. Neighbors I barely knew left notes on my doorstep. One woman brought over a casserole and said, "You don't deserve this, Carol. We've all seen how you cared for her." Even the church board, who had once hesitated to take sides, invited me to lead the next community elder care seminar. Still beneath the surface, I felt tremors. Lena was quiet these days, not distant, but reflective. One night, I found her sorting through old photos and letters in the study. "I'm thinking of writing about all this," she said. "For my ethics class, about obligation and inheritance. About what we owe and what's just expected." I nodded, understanding more than she knew. "You should include the owl," I told her, gesturing to Nora's flea market relic on the windowsill. Nothing about it makes sense, but she loved it fiercely. She smiled, but I could see the conflict. She was torn between lineage and loyalty, between the family that raised her and the one she wanted to claim. It wasn't just my battle, it was hers too. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, again. I found myself in the garden, barefoot robe drawn tight, trimming the bougainvillea by moonlight. It was overgrown again, wild and defiant, refusing to be shaped. I paused, shears in hand, and realized it wasn't supposed to be tidy. It wasn't meant to conform. Neither was I. That morning, I wore a navy dress and carried Nora's shawl not out of sentimentality, but because it was mine now. The courtroom was sterile, but my memories weren't. The judge was measured. The lawyers sparred trading language like fencing blades. Melanie sat stiffly, her jaw clenched, her eyes daring. When my turn came to speak, I didn't read a statement. I spoke plainly. I cared for Nora not because of obligation, but because of love. That house is not a trophy. It's the last place she knew peace. It's where she died holding my hand. She chose me because she trusted me to protect it. I will. When I stepped down, there was no applause, just silence. But it wasn't empty. It was full, like breath held. The judge didn't rule that day. We'll reconvene, he said. Further review needed. Legal speak for this isn't over. But I had said what I needed to, and something in me, something old and clenched, began to let go. That night, Lena came into the kitchen holding a framed photo. It was from a picnic me, Nora, and her 3 generations of something real. She said, "Whatever happens, we keep this, right?" Right. There's a peculiar silence that settles after a courtroom hearing, a kind of emotional tinnitus that lingers long after the arguments have been made, when the only thing left is to wait. It isn't peace, it's suspension. A breath held too long, and in the weeks following our appearance before the judge, I found myself caught in that limbo, neither victorious nor defeated, just suspended in uncertainty. Lena, ever the diligent student, returned to campus a few days after the hearing, though she called every evening without fail. Her voice grounded me. She sent articles about contested inheritance cases, excerpts from ethics readings, even a podcast about adult children navigating estranged familial obligations. I read and listened dutifully, not just to support her, but because I saw myself in every anecdote, every footnote. It was comforting to know our story, my story, was not isolated. But comfort was fleeting. 2 Sundays after the hearing, I received word that Diane had suffered a minor stroke. It happened during a staff meeting at the clinic where she volunteered part-time. Melanie had been the one to call her voice clipped and professional. "She's stable," she said. "You don't need to do anything. Just thought you'd want to know." But I did do something. I sent flowers. A modest bouquet of freesia and lavender, Diane's favorites, though I doubt Melanie remembered. I included a note for the woman I knew before all this, wishing you a full recovery, Carol. I didn't expect a reply, and none came. Still, the gesture was more for myself than for her. A release of bitterness, not an erasure of history. In the absence of immediate legal resolution, my days settled into a new rhythm. I began volunteering at the community senior center again, offering blood pressure checks and wellness talks. It was familiar ground, and I found solace in the small, quiet tasks, organizing medication trays, listening to stories about grandchildren, offering measured advice about sodium intake and fall-proofing bathrooms. One afternoon, a woman named June pulled me aside. "You're the one from the article, right?" she asked, her tone cautious but kind. I nodded. "My daughter tried to do the same," she said. "She thought my house was her down payment. I had to put it in a trust just to feel safe in my own home." We talked for nearly an hour. Not just about family, but about autonomy. About the indignity of becoming property in the eyes of those you raised. It was both affirming and disheartening, this quiet epidemic of betrayed caregivers. That evening, I dug out Aunt Nora's old journals. I hadn't opened them in years. She wrote in neat cursive, always dated, always matter of fact. Grocery lists mingled with memories, sermon notes next to dreams she never pursued. And tucked between 2 yellowed pages was a list I'd never seen before, things to leave behind. Regret for marrying Harold, the red coat I never wore, hoping Diane would visit again, fear of dying alone. Number 3 struck like a blade. She had still hoped, even after all the absences, even after the disappointments, and yet she'd chosen me. The weight of that choice settled on me differently now. It wasn't just a reward for loyalty, it was a burden of trust, a mandate to preserve not only her memory but her intent. Meanwhile, the case dragged on. Miranda kept me updated. Melanie's lawyer was stalling, requesting document verifications and challenging the will's notarization. Though every challenge was flimsy at best. "It's a war of attrition," she told me. "They're banking on exhaustion." And they weren't entirely wrong. I was tired. Bone-deep tired. Not just from the legal strain, but from the emotional erosion day by day, the quiet ache of having to justify love. Then unexpectedly, a new thread emerged. I received a letter not from Melanie, but from her daughter, a girl I barely knew. She introduced herself as Ava, 19, in her first semester at a small liberal arts college. She'd found my address among Diane's papers and said she wanted to meet not as an emissary, but as herself. "I don't want anything," she wrote. "But I grew up hearing 2 versions of you. I'd like to know which one is true." I hesitated. Another audience, another version of my life placed under a microscope. But something about the earnestness in her handwriting, rounded letters, careful spacing moved me. We met at a coffee shop near campus. She was nervous at first, stirring her tea 3 times before speaking. "I always thought you were the woman who left," she said, "who walked away from the family. But then I started asking questions. And no one really had answers, just opinions. And I didn't give her a rehearsed defense. I told her about Nora's final years, about the quiet rituals of caregiving, about the way grief had shaped me more than anger ever could. She listened, truly listened. At the end, she reached into her bag and handed me something, a photo. Diane, Melanie, Nora, and me from some long-forgotten Easter lunch. I looked tired in the picture, but I was smiling. Genuinely. "I thought you should have it," Ava said. "You're in the middle." Symbolic, I suppose. That night, I placed the photo on the mantel beside Aunt Nora's urn. Not as a reclamation of the past, but as a record. Proof that we were all once part of something. Complicated, flawed, real. Then, just as the week turned, Miranda called with news. The judge had issued an initial ruling. The will stood. It wasn't final, not yet, but it was substantial. The court acknowledged the relationship, the documentation, and the community testimony. Melanie could still appeal, but the tide had shifted. I sat on the porch that evening, twilight painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt amber, and allowed myself a single whispered word, good. Not triumphant, not gloating, just grounded. But something told me it wasn't the end. Because legacies aren't cemented in courtrooms. They live in the retellings, the narratives passed down, the silences between family gatherings, and I knew deeply instinctively that some of those silences were about to break. The word good had barely left my lips before I realized how fragile it was. It wasn't that I doubted the judge's ruling, I trusted the legal process, and more importantly, I trusted Miranda. But the illusion that legal affirmation would bring emotional closure was in hindsight naive. Justice, after all, doesn't erase damage, it only defines it. Within 48 hours of the preliminary ruling, the backlash arrived. Subtle at first. A few mutual acquaintances, people I'd known from church committees and coastal conservation meetings, stopped returning calls. One woman with whom I'd once shared a carpool to hospital fundraisers sent me a politely terse message. "I think it's best we not be involved." Involved in what she didn't say. But the implication was clear. Some version of me had reached them, one I didn't recognize but had come to expect. Then came the local newsletter. An op-ed unsigned but unmistakably authored by someone in Melanie's orbit posed rhetorical questions about elder exploitation and opportunistic caregivers. It was cloaked in hypotheticals, but the subtext was transparent. Aunt Nora and I were the unnamed protagonists in their morality tale, she the frail elder. I, the cunning dependent. I wanted to write a response. I even drafted one, pointed but measured. Miranda advised against it. The more oxygen you give it, she said, the more it grows. So I held my tongue, again. Instead, I poured myself into what I could control, the home, the garden. The quiet rituals that had once tethered me to Aunt Nora and now kept me from unraveling. I repainted the kitchen cabinets a pale sea glass green and finally replaced the cracked tiles near the hearth tiles I'd always meant to fix, but never had the emotional space for, and it helped in its own humble way. Lena returned for spring break during this time, and her presence shifted the atmosphere. She brought with her a sense of youthful certainty that I had long since shed, not arrogance, but clarity. The night she arrived, she set her suitcase down and said, "Tell me what you need and I'll do it." Grandma would have wanted me here. We spent the week repairing the side fence, reading by the fireplace, and cooking old recipes from Nora's handwritten cards. Her buttermilk biscuits, still smudged with flower prints from decades ago, rose beautifully under Lena's patient hands. But it wasn't all peace. One morning, we found our mailbox torn off its post. No note, no witnesses, just splintered wood and a bent hinge. I reported it, of course. The officer who came was sympathetic, even apologetic, but without a name or footage. It became one more unsolved cruelty. Cowardice, Lena muttered, shaking her head. I didn't disagree, but it wasn't new. Cruelty rarely arrives with a name attached. It prefers shadows, plausible deniability. Still, something shifted in me then, a slow ignition. I began to think not just about surviving this battle, but about documenting it, preserving it. Not for vengeance, but for record, for memory. So I began writing. Not the way I had before, not journals or fragmented essays. This time I compiled everything into a living document, letters, photographs, testimonies from friends, Nora's journals, even my own recollections. I titled it Stewardship because that's what this had become. Not ownership of a house, but guardianship of a truth. When I told Reverend Monroe, he nodded solemnly. Testament, he said. That's what you're creating, and testaments always outlast gossip. Meanwhile, the court issued its final ruling. Nora's will was upheld without condition. The property, the estate, every last faded lace doily and overgrown bougainvillea branch, they were mine, legally, irrevocably. Melanie appealed. Of course she did. But this time the judge was explicit. This court finds no merit in continued pursuit. It was a final blow, a dignified rebuke. I wish I could say Melanie vanished into the background after that. But people like Melanie don't disappear, they adapt. I learned through a neighbor that she'd begun telling people she'd let it go for the sake of the family, as though her withdrawal were an act of grace. I didn't challenge the narrative, not out of fear but exhaustion. Some truths I've come to believe can't be argued into acceptance. They must simply outlast the lies. But the most unexpected development came not from Diane or Melanie, but from Ava. She emailed me a week after the ruling asking if she could visit again. "I want to hear more," she wrote. "Not just about the house, about you, about Nora, about what mattered." She arrived that Saturday bearing a pie she'd baked herself. It's barely edible, but I tried, and a notebook full of questions. We sat on the porch, the wind sharp but tolerable, and talked for hours. About caregiving, about legacy, about the ache of being misrepresented. At one point she asked, "Do you regret it fighting for all this?" I thought about the question for a long time. "I regret that it had to be a fight," I said. "But no, I don't regret protecting what deserved protection. I don't regret honoring the woman who gave me more than anyone else ever did." She nodded. "I think that matters more than who gets listed on a deed." That night, as I tucked away the leftovers and turned off the porch light, I noticed something small but poignant. Ava had placed her notebook beside the framed photo of me, Nora, and Diane from decades ago. A new page sat open, her pen resting on top. The title read, "What We Choose to Keep," not long after Lena left again for finals for internships for life. But before she did, she handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a new mailbox post carved with delicate ivy motifs. "I know it won't stop people from trying," she said, "but it'll remind them who's still standing." It now stands at the edge of the driveway, sturdy, rooted, beautiful in its quiet defiance. I don't know if the family will try again. I don't know if Diane will reach out, or if Melanie will rewrite the story for her own children one day. I can't control that. What I do know is this: the house is still standing. The garden still grows, the shawl still hangs behind the door, and somewhere in Ava's handwriting our story is being recorded with care. The house is still standing. That phrase returned to me one morning in late April as I sipped my coffee in the sunroom, the one Nora and I had once considered turning into a sewing room, but never quite managed. The light came through the gauzy curtains just so, casting long soft shadows across the floorboards. The hydrangeas had begun to bloom again, and the mailbox, newly installed with its ivy-carved post, gleamed just slightly from last night's rain. The quiet was not the same as peace, but it was close enough. After months of turmoil, I found myself almost shyly rebuilding the life that had been put on pause. But rebuilding at my age is a strange thing. It's less about momentum and more about integration, about deciding what deserves to remain. That's when I began to seriously consider what legacy means when you no longer need to defend it. For so long, I'd fought to preserve Nora's wishes, to safeguard the truth of our bond, to push back against a family narrative that had no room for my presence. But once the courtroom dust settled, once the neighborhood gossip moved on to someone else's scandal, I was left not with triumph, but with space. And space, I've learned, is both liberating and terrifying, because space demands decision. So I asked myself, what now? I'd been keeping stewardship, my living document of Nora's life, and the fight for the house close to my chest, unsure if it was simply a private record or something more. But after Ava's last visit, after reading her thoughtful reflections scribbled in the margins of her notebook, I began to think differently. Perhaps it was meant to be shared not in the way of tell-all memoirs or dramatic confessions, but as a quiet offering. A guide for women like me and women unlike me who might one day find themselves having to defend love against bloodlines or meaning against entitlement. I emailed Reverend Monroe and asked if the church library would consider adding it once it was complete. He replied within an hour it would be an honor. Stewardship, after all, is sacred work. That same week, I received an unexpected card in the mail. It was from Diane. The handwriting was shaky, unmistakably altered from the stroke, but still hers. She didn't apologize, not explicitly, but she thanked me for the flowers, and she wrote something I hadn't anticipated. I don't know what I believed about Nora in the end, but I believe she trusted you, and that should have been enough. I sat with that sentence for a long while. It didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the years of distance or the chaos of the last year, but it softened something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but release. I didn't write back. Not because I was withholding, but because some threads, when loosened, need not be retied. They simply need to be set down gently. And then came Lena's graduation. She'd asked me months earlier if I'd come, but I hadn't realized until I saw the envelope, embossed with the school seal lined with gold, how deeply that meant something. She'd listed me as her emergency contact, as her primary guest, as her family. The ceremony was small, held on the quad beneath a cloud-dappled sky. I watched her walk across the stage, her posture straight, her eyes bright. When they called her name, I clapped until my hands stung. And in that moment, with tassels swinging and music swelling, I felt the full arc of what we had preserved. Not just a house, not just a legal right, but a lineage of care. Afterward, we stood beneath a flowering magnolia. She handed me her cap and said, "This is yours too." "No," I replied, "it's yours, but I'll keep the photo." We took one, her in her gown, me in the shawl, both of us smiling in that quiet, unguarded way people do when they know what it took to arrive somewhere. Chounce. Back at the house, I finally opened the last of Nora's boxes. I'd avoided it for over a year, the one tucked in the corner of the attic labeled in her loopy script, "Keep if you must." Inside were old recipe cards, faded scarves, and at the bottom, a single photograph I had never seen before Nora as a young woman, standing beside a car with chipped paint and a dog at her heels. She looked straight at the camera, unsmiling but certain. On the back she had written, "This is where it began, but not where it ends." It didn't take long for me to understand. The next morning I called the County Historical Society. I offered a donation, not large but meaningful. Enough to sponsor a community lecture series on women caregivers and the ethics of legacy. I told them I didn't want my name on a plaque. I just wanted Nora's story told. And Lena's. And even Diane's. Because family is never simple. And legacy is never clean. But stories when told with care have a way of honoring both the mess and the meaning. I also made one more decision. I revised my will. I left the house to Lena, but with it I left something else, a set of letters bound and sealed, one for each decade of her life ahead. Not instructions, not expectations, just reflections. A record of what I learned too late and what I hope she remembers too soon. And at the very end I wrote this: "Let no one tell you what love is worth. If you have held a hand in silence, waited in the hallway while the world moved on, or planted something that would bloom long after you're gone, then you already know. Now when I walk the garden path in the early morning, I no longer count what was taken or tested. I count what remains. The rosemary is thriving again. The mailbox stands firm. Ava sends emails from her creative writing class quoting Nora's phrases back to me. Diane's card is pressed between the pages of stewardship. And Lena, when she visits, no longer knocks, she comes home. This, I think, is what Nora meant by trust. Not obligation, not heritage, but continuation. I don't know how the town will remember me, or if it will at all. But the house remembers. And in that, I find peace. Story 2. Jane Walker is my name. I'm 32 years old and reside in the Denver, Colorado suburbs. Despite not being flashy, my job as a high school librarian makes me happy. Until that tragic morning when my grandmother's legacy was read out in front of the entire family, I always believed that my life would go by as smoothly as the pages I flipped each day. Pale sunshine filtered through gray curtains made the lawyer's little office, which smelled of old paper, even more gloomy. My 35-year-old brother, Ethan Walker, a prosperous Chicago businessman, was seated next to me. Ethan was sitting comfortably in a leather chair wearing a pricey suit, and his lips were curled into an ugly grin. He was constantly overconfident, contemptuous of everyone around him, and certain that he was entitled to a privilege. Jackson, a tall, slender man with glasses falling down his nose and salt and pepper hair, looked over the file. In the oppressive air, his voice reverberated evenly. Ethan Walker, the grandson of the late Mrs. Grace Walker, inherits the 3-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago. Even though I had anticipated this result, my heart fell. I couldn't help but feel let down. Ethan gave me a self-satisfied smirk before crossing his arms and leaning back as though everything were beneath him. After a brief break, Lawyer Jackson cleared his throat and went on reading. And the whole plot attached to the wooden house in Springwood Village. Jane Walker, Mrs. Grace's granddaughter, inherits. I went cold. As a child, I had only made a few trips to the isolated community of Springwood. According to my memory, that house was so run down that it may fall apart during a powerful storm. Ethan started giggling. At least you got something, Jane. Perhaps you ought to learn how to cut wood. Winter will arrive soon. Each word had a dagger-like quality, entering my heart more deeply. I chewed my lip in an attempt to remain composed. But a burst of wrath swept through me. Grandma cherished me. Why this at the end of the world? Why was I only worth a dilapidated house? The will reading was over in a flash. Ethan got up and gave me a shoulder pat while pretending to grin. Jane, congratulations. The Springwood squirrels might eat the papers, so be careful to keep them safe. I was left alone in the chilly room as he turned and left. My hair was tangled by the strong fall wind when I went outside. My hubby was waiting already, Ryan. His expression tightened as though I was somehow to blame for all that had just transpired. However, you intend to tell me what you have then? His eyes were full of blame and his voice was cutting. As I related what I had heard, I started to cry. With eyes that flashed with intense disappointment, Ryan shook his head. A dilapidated wooden home in a desolate village. You sicken me, Jane. Why do you cause difficulty every time? Take a look at Ethan. He was given a $1 million apartment. How about you? You are of no use, bringing everyone down with you at all times. I took a step back, experiencing more anguish than any knife could. All of my sacrifices and efforts for this man and this family. And I received this in exchange. Ryan, please stop talking like this. I'm done. Gather your belongings, leave my house. Someone who just knows how to be a burden has no place in my support system. Ryan's face was flushed with rage as he spat out every word. The world seemed to fall apart all around me. I averted my gaze to conceal the silent tears that were falling. A shabby suitcase by itself, and the Springwood house documents. I had no idea where I was going as I made my way through the huge city. A burning question and an unending emptiness were all that were left inside of me. What could be more cruel than fate? At the inner city bus stop, my little suitcase clattered on the uneven cement as I departed Denver on a dreary afternoon. I had to pull up the torn collar of my flimsy coat as the chilly wind sliced through my flesh, carrying dust and the pungent stench of exhaust. I didn't turn around. Not necessary. I had lost a life behind me. A voyage to an unknown destination lay ahead of me. My destination was listed as Springwood on the ticket I was holding. It sounded like a cruel joke about fate. It's freezing to the bone but gentle to the ear. It had cost me almost every last penny. That village was the only location I had the right to enter, not because I thought it could offer me anything positive. On paper, anyhow. The city lights disappeared as the shaky bus withdrew. Watching the mountain ranges disappear into the evening mist, I cuddled up by the window. There weren't many people in the bus. An elderly man holding a tiny dog, a woman with a scarf over her head, and a young pair sleeping together. Along the lengthy journey, the winds whistling through the crevices and the engine's groan created a constant yet eerie sound. I made myself recall my recollections of Grandma Grace, who I used to think was the one person who could provide me with emotional support. The warm afternoon came back to me. Holding my hand tightly as though she was worried I may trip, she guided me along the creek behind the home. She told me about the wooden house she acquired from my great-grandfather, in those days Springwood, and the folks who had lived there. I foolishly thought the house was where magic resided, since her voice sounded like a calming lullaby. But now that magic had crumbled in my thoughts, leaving only uncertainty, resentment, and the pain of abandonment. As the bus moved toward the outskirts, the light dimmed. Small basic homes gave way to stark meadows, then to rows of bare trees in the cool fall air. The bus jolted hard on the uneven roads, and I had to hold onto the rail to stay upright. The driver finally declared that we had arrived at Springwood over 8 hours later. I stumbled to my feet and landed on the uneven, dusty ground. A tiny village that had been forgotten by time lay in front of me. Along the main route are dilapidated wooden dwellings. Some parts of their roofs are already deteriorating, and others are sagging. The rocky path was hardly illuminated by the streetlights. There was nobody around. Through the skeletal branches, only the rustle of the wind. As I stood there in the dark, I could hear my heart pounding nervously. The stench of decomposing leaves and moisture permeated the air, as though the location itself murmured ancient tales that no one was interested in hearing anymore. I could see Grandma Grace's house in the distance. That is what remained of it. It appeared to be a neglected wound standing on a broad piece of land. With each burst of wind, the wooden door swung. The majority of the route in the yard was covered in knee-deep weeds. The yard's ancient maple was barren, its parched limbs snatching at the air like skeletal hands. Each step was heavier than the last as I dragged my bag into the yard along the uneven path. I had a lot of questions. Was this the beginning of yet another tragedy, or was this where I would rest? With my shaking hand on the rotting door, I came to a stop at the porch. It took me a while to find the strength to pry it open. In the awful silence, the hinges shrieked. As I entered, the chill slapped my face, and the smell of time and ancient wood filled the air. With only a sliver of moonlight peeking through a broken window and creating faint patterns on the floor, the house was completely dark. I tried to stabilize myself in the darkness by closing my eyes. Grandma's whisper appeared to reach my ears. "Don't be scared, Jane. Every beginning requires some bravery." After inhaling deeply, I dragged my luggage inside and shut the door. In the old house, the darkness engulfed me, and the only sound outside was the wind's ceaseless, lonesome song. I closed the ancient wooden door, and again the old hinges creaked. Although there was a lot of darkness inside, my eyes eventually adapted to the dim moonlight coming in through the broken glass after a few minutes. I remained motionless while I listened to my heart's pounding rhythm. The chamber was cold at night and smelled of old wood dust, yet somehow I wasn't afraid until I switched on my phone's flashlight, the dim light reflecting off the worn wooden walls which weren't as rotten as I had thought. There were no indications of leakage or ceiling collapse. Even as I took a few hesitant steps, the wooden floor beneath my feet remained sturdy and did not creak. I was expecting to see a ruin, but instead I saw an odd area. There were no webs, no heaps of rubble, and none of the stuffy, muggy stench I had imagined. Rather, everything seemed strangely clean, as though someone had taken care of it without my awareness. The living area was uncomplicated yet tidy. A fresh white fabric was placed over the old sofa. Contrary to my expectations, the modest wooden table next to it was only a little dusty from time. An ancient oil lamp that was still full of oil, as though it could be lit with a match alone and drive out the surrounding darkness. I felt the smoothness of the meticulously scrubbed wood as I ran my fingers over the tabletop. My heart became constricted. Who had preserved this house? Why did it seem to have been anticipating my return? The wooden door between the rooms creaked in the quiet night as I moved into the kitchen. The kitchen shelves were illuminated by the beam of the flashlight. The appliances were ancient, but they weren't corroded as I had thought they would be. A folded kitchen towel and a ceramic tea set were tucked away on the shelf. It was not torn, but its cloth deteriorated. I pivoted and took another look around. My heart's mistrust is getting greater. This is not how an abandoned house may remain for years. This place has been saved from oblivion by someone or something. A framed picture on the wall was illuminated by the spotlight. The vintage portrait was of Grandma Grace in her younger years. She had a soft face. Her eyes appeared to be compassionate and intent on me. My heart hurt. Perhaps it was all in my head. However, I no longer felt alone at that very time. I continued to ascend to the second story. With every step, there was a slight creak in the wooden steps. The slender corridor to the bedrooms was brightened by the flashlight. I selected the closest door and pushed it open. A tiny chamber caught my eye. Clean yet basic. The mattress by the window had the old sheets folded neatly. In silence, an antique rocking chair faced the unkempt garden. The old curtains rustled and fluttered with nostalgia as the night wind swept through a window breach. I approached the window and gazed down at the weed-choked garden. In the moonlight, the old maple's shadow extended far. Like a tangled artwork of recollections, its parched branches entwined. I had no idea what to name this sensation, a soft melancholy or an odd calm in my spirit. I had not envisioned this house to be a ruin. I knew that person was me because it felt like an old book sitting on a shelf just waiting to be opened. I returned to the living room, put my suitcase down, and sat in the solitude by the little table. On the porch, I could hear the gentle patter of leaves falling. Had this house been waiting for me for all these years, I wondered? What did it want me to do if it did? The oil lamp shook and clinked softly when an unexpected burst of wind blew through the window. I was taken aback, like though I had just woken up from a dream. I was certain I would not sleep. To find out why this mansion was still standing and why fate had sent me back here, I had to investigate every inch of it. My heart pounded as I sat in the living room for a long time, feeling a mixture of interest and uneasiness. Outside, the moonlight dimmed and was replaced by a deeper shadow, cloaking the house. I was urged by a thought. There must yet be things here that I hadn't seen, and I needed to locate them tonight before exhaustion robbed me of my bravery. I took the flashlight and started going through the home room by room. However, I saw that the sequence wasn't arbitrary. Everything was outdated. It had been purposefully set up to look as though it had been maintained in secret. Upon arriving at the end of the first floor corridor, the dim light illuminated a little door concealed behind a wooden cabinet. I would have missed it if I hadn't paid great attention. The door, which had no handle, was set into the wooden wall, just a tiny indentation large enough to press. There was a moment of doubt as I knelt down and touched it, feeling the cold of old wood. I then inhaled deeply and gave it a gentle push. There was a black area within when the door creaked and moved a little. When I shone the flashlight, a small stairway that led beneath emerged. The smell of rotting wood and dust filled the cold air that rose from below. I wondered if I could get a chill anywhere in this house. That would be this. But dread was overwhelmed by curiosity. I retreated. At the bottom, every step reverberates quietly in the darkness. I almost held my breath. A large space with a low ceiling and bookcases lining the walls arose in front of me. Different four walls were covered by shelves that extended to the ceiling and were stocked with books of different sizes, shapes, and colors. I moved into the beam of the flashlight and saw tattered book spines, some wrapped in ragged velvet and some faded and bound in leather. While several bore other languages, some were printed in Old English. I was able to identify German, French, and even some Latin that I had never seen in textbooks. It was emotion not cold that made me shudder. I had no idea that there was a wealth of information hidden beneath this wooden house that looked to be deserted. The modest woman with the flour-dusted aprons, Grandma Grace, had been the custodian of a cultural heritage I had never imagined. I picked up a leather-bound book off the shelf with trembling hands and lightly stroked its spine. My heart was pulled by the subtle smell of aged paper. Yellowed pages with clear print were visible under the spotlight. The early New England settlers' history. I also turned a few more pages starting in 1835, feeling as though I was unlocking a door to the past that my grandmother had secretly prepared for me. I scanned the room with the flashlight. In addition to literature, the shelves held little wooden boxes with handmade script labels, family records, land maps, and private correspondence. I was guided back to my long-forgotten roots by each letter, which felt like a message from my grandma. I no longer felt lost or abandoned in that instant. I realized that my grandmother had trusted her faith, love, and the Walker family's secrets to this mansion, which was more than just a place to stay. And she had picked me to carry on that tradition. I stayed still in the room, allowing the gentle whistling of the wind to reach me like my grandmother's whisper through the vent. I was overcome with emotion and thankfulness. I cried because after all these years, I finally felt like I belonged someplace in the shadows, not because I was ashamed or lonely. A weird warmth emanated from the library, like though it were consoling and hugging me. I had, after all, lost. I was aware that my trip was only getting started and that I needed to figure out how to safeguard and unlock this intellectual gem. Even though I had a lot of obstacles ahead, I sensed one thing. The most priceless present was this one. I had lost my granny. A gift with no monetary worth surrounded by antique books. A mixture of wonder, thankfulness, and inquiry filled my emotions. In addition to leaving me a wealth of information, my grandmother Grace obviously had more. I was more cautious when I showed the flashlight. The dim lights that swept across the shelves came to a halt in the far back corner where an old rug with frayed edges was lying. Part of the rug protruded as though someone had picked it up quickly and put it down again. My heart began to race. I got on my knees and carefully pushed the rug away. A square metal hatch set into the wooden floor was lit by the flashlight. A handle was attached in the middle of the little trap door. I inhaled deeply and pulled forcefully. With the dry sound of unused hinges, the door burst open. A chilling breeze arose, making me shudder. A narrow set of rusted iron steps led down from a little area below. I dimly shone the flashlight down and saw a big, hefty item covered in time's dust. When I discovered it was an antique safe, my heart began to rush. My head was suddenly overflowing with questions. What was Grandma concealing? Is this the last secret she wants me to discover? My footsteps echoed in the quiet as I moved down. Black steel was used to make the safe. It had a smooth, worn dial. I brushed against the heavy dust. Wiped the dial clean. I gasped in anticipation. The combination was unknown to me. My grandmother had always maintained that my birthday was the most memorable day of her life, but then I recalled that. Is it possible? I turned the clock with shaking hands and punched in the date of my birth, September 17th. I heard a faint click as I completed the final number. The safe opened. There was no gold or wealth within as I had momentarily thought. Rather, there were little boxes of paper folders tied neatly, and a pile of letters in yellowed envelopes addressed to Jane. Only open when you're prepared. As I took up the letters, my hands shook. I opened the first envelope while sitting on the steps. My eyes were flooded with my grandmother's precise, slightly crooked, and well-known calligraphy, each letter resonating with her voice from long ago. If you are reading this, my love Jane, you have discovered the real gift I left for you. I am aware that not getting the flat must have made you unhappy and frustrated. I hope you see that this wasn't unfair, but Ethan did. I gave it a lot of thinking. For Ethan, that apartment is merely a piece of real estate that he would eventually sell since it suits his needs. However, I left this house, this library, and everything in it for you, Jane. Since you are the only one who can comprehend and preserve the family's heritage, I know that. I was unable to control my tears. I had been feeling lonely for a long time, but every phrase was like an embrace. She had recognized my value, even when it was denied by the outside world. I opened additional envelopes. Several letters described the house's history, including how my great-grandfather had constructed it at the close of the 18th, and how it had previously served as a meeting spot for the area's earliest immigrants. She wrote a description of each book in the library, detailing how she had discreetly gathered and kept them safe during trying times. Then I came to a stack of papers bound with a silver ribbon. Copies of antique certificates, deeds, and correspondence between my great-grandfather and academics from his era were found inside. To create the image of our family's past, she had meticulously preserved even the tiniest pieces. And now she thought I was the one who finished it. I discovered an old black and white photograph among the papers. An infant in the arms of my grandmother who was quite young. Me? She gazed lovingly into the camera as I grinned broadly and gripped her apron with my little hand. I started crying when I saw that picture. Deep emotion took the place of all my hurt and animosity. My heart felt oddly warm as I sat there in the dense darkness of the cellar. I was aware that she had left me more than simply tangible belongings. I was determined to fulfill the mission she had given me to uphold and perpetuate the Walker family's spiritual, cultural, and ancestral values. For a long time, I sat in silence in the basement, surrounded by the papers and letters she left behind, allowing all of my feelings to wash over me like waves on a beach. Even though it was becoming late, I didn't feel drowsy. There was just tranquility now, along with a renewed resolve, more powerful than anything I had ever experienced. Then I got it. I no longer feared this place as a burden. It was the foundation, the location where my family's soul and memories were kept. Every book wall and brick in this place had stories that would be lost to time if I didn't preserve them. Not so that I would flee or sell it for cash, but because my grandma had trusted me. However, thus I would pen the Walker family's next unfinished chapter. The following morning, I sat at the kitchen table and drank a tasteless cup of coffee while the dirty window let in a little sunlight. The phone rang, echoing a familiar tone. I calmly spoke as I looked at the computer and felt my heart clench a little at the name I picked up. "Hi there, Ethan." I heard my brother's voice. Unable to conceal his impatience, he tried to seem friendly. "I've heard that you've arrived in Springwood, Dane. Perhaps we ought to discuss the legacy a little more." I mean, it took me a few seconds to respond after remaining silent. "Jane, go ahead. I've been considering how unsuitable the Chicago apartment would be. I'm too occupied? And that Springwood mansion despite its age? I think I could remodel it, make it a getaway, or invest in it in some way. What are your thoughts? What if we switch? You take the apartment, I take the mansion. Wouldn't it be win-win?" With a tone full of calculation, Ethan spoke in a single breath. I gave a slight smile, but it wasn't a sour one. I was different. I had lost Jane and was no longer the weak one. I responded slowly, letting each word pierce the atmosphere. "I'm not going to trade this house, thank you, Ethan. For me, it is more significant than any apartment. Family is involved. It's memories. It's my path, I'll remain here and see to it. I can choose that." The other end was silent for a few seconds. Then Ethan gave a little chuckle. "Consider it, Jane. Don't regret missing the opportunity to transform your life." "I've given it some thought," I whispered softly yet firmly, Ethan. "I won't regret it, I'm sure of it." Before he could utter another word, I hung up. As I placed the phone on the table, I noticed that the early sun was starting to cast gold across the expansive, choked garden outside the window. I began planning the house's restoration rather than selling it, showing it off, or proving anything to anyone. However, in order for me to live in a real location where I belonged, I reached for paper and pen, enumerating the necessary tasks: repair the roof and strengthen the wood floors, modernize the wiring and plumbing, tidy up the garden, examine and maintain the library. I strolled to the village's last remaining cafe that afternoon. The residents of Springwood gave me a curious, if wary, look. After asking around, I was introduced to Harold, an elderly handyman who had fixed a number of the area's older homes. Harold took a long look around the house before nodding when I located him. "It remains sturdy. All Miss Jane needs to do is put up some effort to bring this house back to life. It's not the type of thing you discard." His remarks made me more determined. I started working bit by bit, day by day, early in the morning. I trimmed dead branches and cleaned leaves from the yard. As night set, I sat by the window in the library reading all of Grandma's letters and taking in what she had to say. Together with me, the house started to come back to life. The dust of time seemed to be lifted with each hammer blow and broom sweep, reviving this place and my emotions. A fresh light was emerging. Self-belief in the actual worth of history and affection. I quietly vowed that this was just the beginning. As I gazed at the safe, which was still crammed with documents and unread letters, I had to keep discovering all that Grandma had so meticulously saved. I got to my feet and shut the safe. My heart is full with resolve. Springwood and the days that followed went by more quickly than I had anticipated. I got up really early every morning to inhale the smell of ancient wood and natural grass before starting my work. I put all of my work into this house, which had previously been hidden beneath layers of dust and memories. But I was aware that I needed help. I heard the people talk about Harold, so I went looking for him once more. They claimed that the elderly craftsman's hands were golden. Harold was older than 60. Despite his slightly hunched back, he was sturdy. On a rare sunny fall morning, he arrived at the house with a shabby toolkit and a faded cap. He sat on the porch for a while looking about the house, then turned to face me. Through thick glasses, his eyes sparkled. "Jane, miss, I'll assist. The foundation of this house is still sound. We are able to repair it. It will require patience, though, individually." I firmly grasped Harold's hand, certain that I had come to the proper person. First, we looked at the roof. Harold ascended and strengthened the timbers by replacing the rotting planks. I cleaned up the damaged tiles in the yard and gave him some tools. The flooring came next. Windows, plumbing? As Harold worked on the house gradually changed day by day as though it had just woken up from a lengthy sleep. I concentrated on the hidden library that my grandmother had left behind. I was aware that its worth extended beyond memories. It was a real gem, and I longed to learn more about it. I went online and contacted rare bookstores and large city appraisal clubs. Following several phone conversations, I was able to get in touch with a specialist in New York, a young man named Liam Scott, who specializes in rare books and historical papers. Liam took the car to Springwood 3 days later. His eyes glowed as he entered the library basement, despite his modest demeanor and simple attire of a shirt and faded corduroy jacket. Liam handled each book with a particular reverence after standing in wonder and staring at the shelves covered in dust from the passage of time. After hours of meticulous study, he said, "Jane, this library is significantly more valuable than any residence in New York or Chicago. First editions of publications from the 17th and 17th and 18th centuries, as well as writers' signatures and seals from aristocratic families, can be found here. To ascertain their actual worth, some would have to be put up for worldwide auction. This collection of New England history alone, could buy a whole row of downtown mansions." His words made my heart race, out of dignity, not for the money. Waiting for a deserving heir, Grandma Grace had protected a treasure she never brags about. I asked Liam to put me in touch with appraisers, if I wanted to sell conservative or even locate reliable auction houses. I shook my head, though. "Thank you, Liam. I'll need some time to reflect. With something this valuable, I don't want to jump into anything. Perhaps I will preserve it as part of the history of this place." With a respectful look in his eyes, Liam nodded. He claimed he would give me further details about preservation organizations and that he would return with a single phone call if I needed anything before he left. Meanwhile, the residents of Springwood started offering assistance. Once unknown faces grew friendly. Every morning I received warm loaves of bread from Mrs. Mary, who owned the little grocery store. I got quality wood pieces from Mr. George, the village's longtime carpenter, to fix the bookshelves. And most unexpectedly, Grandma Grace's longtime friend Mr. Samuel called me one afternoon. In her letter she had mentioned, "I've been waiting for you to come back to Springwood, Jane. As your grandmother Grace used to remark, this place will come alive again when Jane returns. Ask if you need anything. I've aged. Not much can be done. However, there are still some members of the local Historical Preservation Society that I know. Let me introduce you." I was really touched by Mr. Samuel's kind voice. I was no longer lonely. I was slowly piecing together my family, my community, and most importantly, who I was. Although the days in Springwood went by in silence, they were more valuable to me than anything I had ever owned. Now that old house was changed. Good wood was used to replace the solid window frames on the new roof. With the flower beds I had planted every morning, the yard was free of weeds and was beginning to turn green once more. I noticed sunlight streaming onto the porch as soon as I opened the wooden door. I experienced a remarkable sense of calm in my heart. I no longer felt empty or afraid when I woke up. I felt like I belonged here instead. Every book in the basement library and every brick plank appeared to be going with me on this new adventure. Gradually, I realized that the real significance of the bequest my grandmother Grace handed me was not financial gain, but rather the unseen connection between the past and present, between family and myself. The residents of Springwood stopped observing me with interest. They started to consider me a member of the little group. Mrs. Mary occasionally brought me a basket of freshly picked apples, and Mr. Harold would visit in the afternoons to see how the roof was doing. When I stood on the porch, the village kids began to run across my yard, beaming at me. I had never experienced the intimacy and coziness of a simple life in the big metropolis, but now more than ever, I felt it. I also started devoting more time to in-depth library research. Grandma departed. The stacks of books have changed from being dead stacks of paper. They functioned as doorways to the past and the ideals that my forefathers had upheld for decades. I sought conservation assistance from the state's Historical Preservation Society and got enthusiastic support. On some late nights, I opened an old book at the window and let the sound of the garden wind mix with the pages while I felt a remarkable sense of calmness lift my heart. My phone called one afternoon as the sun disappeared behind the far-off hills. Ethan. I was hesitant to respond. Jane. The tone of my brother's voice changed from haughtiness to uncertainty. You've done a lot with that house, I've heard. I would like to know if you are content. I grinned as I gazed at the garden, which was bathed in sunlight. Indeed, Ethan. I'm genuinely pleased for the first time in my life. For a long time, the other end was silent. Then Ethan sighed quietly. Please let me know if you need anything, and I hope you can keep on to what is most valuable. I was relieved when the call came to an end. Perhaps deep inside, Ethan was starting to see the worth in what he had previously written off. I listened to the hum of insects while sitting on the porch that July evening. The stars were strewn across the deep blue like pearls, and the sky was clear. I silently looked up thinking, Grandma Grace, I know you'd smile contentedly if you could see me now. I realized there was still a long way to go. Repairing the house will take further days. Studying the library's issues and transforming it into a living piece of history for the community has left me with many sleepless nights. However, this is the first time. I didn't feel scared. I had myself my mission and my faith. The house came back to life with me every day, and I could feel my heart becoming stronger and more liberated. I had found my place and realized the legacy's actual worth. Most importantly, I discovered who I was. After a great number of wasted years, a new chapter had begun, and I was prepared to welcome it with all of my love and optimism as I closed my eyes and listened to the wind and the echoes of past pages, from a lost and adrift woman following family strife. In the quiet village of Springwood, I had discovered the real purpose of my existence. The old house my grandmother had left me was more than simply a place to live. It was a path and a memory. I'm honored to uphold this legacy. I became more self-assured, and realized my true value as a result of the house's restoration. I now approach every day with thankfulness, happiness, and a desire to keep sharing these moral principles with the society. How do you feel about Jane's path and her choice to uphold her family's heritage? Leave a comment with your ideas. For more poignant and thought-provoking tales on family life, remember to subscribe to the channel. Story 3. Brandon is my name. My age is and I've been the one behind the curtain for as long as I can remember. While my family grinned for the pictures, I was discreetly pulling the threads, arranging, paying, repairing, and smoothing things out. That's not what I say to sound honorable. It's simply the way it has always been. I was the planner, the trustworthy one, and the responsible one. I was already assisting my younger siblings with their homework and making appointments for my mom's doctor's visits when I was 12. Dad used to call me the glue and give me a pat on the back, but glue never gets a thank you. Until it cracks, it merely keeps everything together. This year was Dad's 65th birthday, a significant amount. Retirement, Medicare, everything. I assumed that I would go all out. Every time he expressed his desire to travel to the Caribbean, a bright sunny place with unending buffets and crystal clear water. 6 months before the trip, I began organizing it. I looked into shore excursions, rooms, and cruise lines. In order to get a personalized cake with the words "Happy 65th Captain Kin" inscribed in gold icing, I even worked with the ship's events manager. I spent a total of $200 on the vacation. I remained still. I did this for my father. Not only for him either. It was for everyone in the family. For my parents, I reserved cottages. Kevin, my younger brother, and his spouse. Myself, my sister Gina, and Lisa, her girlfriend. There are 7 of us. I ensured that everyone had a paid itinerary and a private balcony. Scuba diving in St. Thomas. San Juan zipline. In Barbados, sampling rum. Everything. I even created custom baggage tags. I was reviewing my packing list at my work 3 days prior to the vacation. It was a group text from Gina when my phone died. Just so you know, Brandon, we gave Lisa your cottage instead. According to Dad, she makes him laugh more and he wants to spend the trip with her. I hope that's cool. I read it again after blinking at the screen. To be sure I hadn't missed a joke, I scrolled higher. Perhaps they were planning a surprise and this was part of it. Not at all. Kevin's response was, LOL, classic dad. Lisa used a heart emoji in response. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody inquired about my feelings about relinquishing the place I had paid for. Nobody even bothered to express gratitude. They treated me like a stray extra who had gone off to their holiday, bumping my hotel, my trip, and my card. For a while, I just sat there. Not upset, not quite yet. Mostly in a state of shock. You are familiar with the constricted sensation behind your eyelids, similar to the buildup to a storm. That was how it felt. The realization that this was nothing new came slowly and bitterly. It was only the priciest iteration of an ancient design. They constantly took, and I always gave. Lisa had more humor. Lisa was more entertaining. Lisa was nearer to me and the family. The organizer was me, the backup plan, the wallet. I took a good look at the message before responding. Make a copy of that. I only stated that. Not cool, not okay. 2 terms with a wide range of meanings. They didn't inquire further. I poured myself some whiskey that evening. I turned on my laptop and signed into all of the reservation portals that were available to me. The group airport transfer, the cake seller, the cruise line, and even the private island tour. I canceled all of them and made arrangements to send everyone to the port. The problem with being the planner, the fixer, and the glue is this. Everything was in my name, including the booking confirmation and the password. 3:24 a.m. Gina sent me an SMS. Hello, just making sure. Has the snorkeling trip been canceled? The app does not display it. I didn't respond. Kevin added, Bro, why does the cruise booking say no active reservation at 4:11 a.m.? What's happening? Didn't respond yet. 6 a.m. My mother called. I let it to ring. After that, I switched off my phone and took a stroll. While some repercussions was to be expected, what transpired next was a cascade. It seems that my parents had previously discussed the cruise with all of their acquaintances. Both Gina and Kevin had taken time off from their jobs. They had set up automated light timers, dog sitters, and daycare. For the trip, Lisa reportedly purchased a whole new beach attire, tagging it on Instagram with the hashtag #CruiseQueen. And now nothing. Don't travel, not a cake, no beach. Even their enhanced drink packages were canceled by me. However, it wasn't the end. The satisfying part wasn't even that. Because I was organizing my own sea for the last few years while they were rushing, contacting support, ranting with customer service representatives, and trying to rebook at the last minute only to discover that everything was either sold out or quadruple the price. In a house I owned, my parents had been living for free. I inherited the house from my grandpa, so technically it was still in my name. It made sense, so I'd let them remain there. They were mortgage-free. I didn't require the location. And I felt like a good son because of it. Though once I saw that sentence, everything changed. I thus got in touch with a property management business, scheduled a thorough inspection, and delivered a formal notice of tenancy termination. 3 days later, the locks were replaced. The utility accounts no longer included their name. They were utilizing a shared Verizon family plan that I terminated under my name. Their storage unit, of course, paid until the end of the month before being scheduled for removal. I didn't yell. It wasn't a dramatic email that I wrote. I just relocated each component individually. The worst part is that they didn't even know the trip was canceled until the day before their scheduled departure. They arrived at the harbor wearing similar t-shirts that read, Dad's 65th ship happens, smiling and carrying luggage. However, no check-in was made. No reservations, no cabin, not a cake, no Brandon. That only served as the warm-up. It was already too late when they recognized what had transpired. Since I started receiving calls once more, I am aware of this. Not messages. Voicemails and calls from confused and desperate people. Some are enraged, while some are only begging. It appears that there has been some sort of error, Brandon honey. The first message came through with Mom's voice crackling. We're not on the list the cruise line claims. Would you please give them a call? You made all the reservations correct, Kevin again. All okay, man. Not amusing. As if we understand. You're angry. Lisa's statements were meaningless. Give me a call. Let's make this right. There was no voicemail from Gina. She just made 7 consecutive calls. Lisa. For the first time in weeks, she sent me a message. Actually, Brandon, I know we started off badly, but this is a huge event for your dad. Don't spoil his special day over a misunderstanding. Before I clicked, I watched her message go unread for an hour, observed. Since it wasn't about the trip at that point, rather it was about every family portrait I took for them, and being instructed to stand behind the camera, I didn't respond. All of them. I appreciate your planning. Every Christmas I spent cleaning dishes I never received. Every Brandon will take care of things, treating me like a live assistant while the joy was watching football. Rather than their son, their sibling. I had given them the benefit of the doubt for years, telling myself that they loved me, that they were only in the moment, and that they didn't mean it. Simply didn't convey it in the same manner. However, I paid for and handed it to Lisa with a nonchalant, "She makes Dad laugh more," after they stole my room, which was my actual wager on the trip. I realized then that they still remembered me. They simply didn't believe that I was important. Then they were outdoors now, literally, because they returned to the house I used to let them reside in 3 days after the disastrous cruise and were unable to enter. With my car parked across the street, my windows tinted, and my sunglasses on, I watched. I wanted to see it because I needed it to feel real, not because I was cruel. For once, I wanted them to experience the same sense of exclusion I did, not welcome. The handle was first tried by a small mother, then the subsequent doorbell, fumbling with his keys. The previous evening, I had had my locks changed. Once more they rang. I was knocked. I saw the bewilderment turn to annoyance, then to fear. Kevin took his phone out. I could infer what he observed. Due to non-payment and unauthorized subletting, they were given 30 days to leave the property by a forwarded legal notice that I had printed and emailed. Technically true thanks to Lisa crashing there without notice a few weeks prior. Gina stormed to the side of the house and tried the back door. I'd had that reinforced too. Eventually they noticed the neighbor watching the same neighborhood once asked me why I never came to the barbecues, then laughed when I said I wasn't invited. She gave me a nod as I drove off that afternoon. The texts turned angrier after that. "You had to know, right? Where are we supposed to go, Branda? This is insane. You're acting like a stranger." Lisa's post about the cruise quietly disappeared from her feed. Then the real unraveling began. Dad's old business partner texted me to ask why the emergency fund wasn't responding to payment requests. Turns out my name was still attached as co-signer. Another thing I'd been too helpful to change, so I did. I moved the money to a trust under my name. Legal. Clean. I even called to confirm there was no breach of contract. There wasn't. Next came the streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, Spotify. Family plan, all canceled. Passwords changed. Email logins locked. A week later, I got a call from Mom. I stared at it, didn't answer. Then another voicemail. She sounded tired, smaller. "Brandon, we don't know what to do. Your dad's sleeping on Kevin's couch and Jenny's staying with friends. I know you're angry, but this is your family. We're not perfect, but we love you. Can we please just talk?" I sat on my couch surrounded by silence. No laughter, no noise, no obligation, just tranquility. And then I got another message from Jenna this time. No greeting, no apology. Just, "Are you seriously going to throw away your entire family over a joke?" That's when something shifted in me. Because it wasn't just a joke, it was a summary. A distillation of every moment I'd been told I was less than every time they pushed me aside. I then acted shocked when I didn't stick around to pick up the pieces. I thought about replying. Instead, I started writing something else. Not to them, to the lawyer, because this wasn't just a vacation anymore. This was a full reset, and they hadn't even seen the worst part yet. I didn't reply to Jenny's message. I didn't need to. I was already several steps ahead, drafting documents with my attorney to formalize what had already begun. A clean separation. Emotionally, financially, legally. There was no major encounter, no shouting match. I didn't hurl dishes or yell that I was done, since I had been done softly, gently in the manner. You stop watering a plant not out of malice, but because you understand it was never yours to take care of in the first place. The lawyer's office was a tiny spot situated between a bakery and a tailor shop downtown. Nothing spectacular, but it felt decisive. We met in person. I brought a list carefully written, cross-referenced. My name was still on, more than I realized. My parents' health insurance copay account, a line of credit they'd been utilizing for years in case of crises. The registration on the family automobile remained in my name from when I helped refinance it 5 years ago. I ordered the lawyer to transfer, revoke, dissolve, or close everything, whichever would remove the relationships fastest. And that storage unit, I had it open. I didn't discard anything. I'm not that individual. However, because Dad was staying at Kevin's, I paid movers to have everything packed up and sent there. On top of the boxes, the invoice was taped. At this point, the message's tone changed once again. They had lost their anger. They didn't understand. I was hurt. It's almost theatrical. This isn't you, Brandon. Could we just take a seat like grown-ups? You're taking revenge. Hateful that one stayed with me. I nearly burst out laughing at the irony, because I had always been understanding, forgiving, and accommodating for the 3 years. Kevin destroyed his car and required a trip from the police station by himself, so I missed my college graduation. Jen, rent money twice without ever requesting reimbursement. In an attempt to cheer them up following Dad's operation last fall, I sent Mom and Dad to Vermont. I did it for no recognition. I think that's what family was meant to be, therefore I did it. However, they didn't. Not at all. My generosity wasn't love to them, it was inventory. A resource is anything that can be distributed, utilized, assumed. The day I discovered the voicemail made that very obvious. I hadn't spoken to that person in years. Uncle Denny, the younger brother of my dad, he got into a fight with his father about a little matter. Dennis never paid back the money he borrowed, according to Dad. Dad lied about a loan, Dennis said. That never took place. Who can tell the truth, but I nearly didn't respond when Dennis called me out of the blue. He sounded lower than I had recalled, slower, as if each syllable had to be drawn from the depths. I don't want to interfere, but I believe you ought to be aware, Brandon. The other day your mom left a message on your aunt's phone. I was unaware that it was still recording. She was ranting about you, saying that this whole situation is simply another instance of your constant pretense of superiority. Said that you're punishing them because you can't bear to see other people happy and that you've never understood what it takes to make sacrifices. He hesitated. I wanted to share it with you. I said very little. I just thanked him. I hung up and sat in quiet, although I told him I appreciated the call. Not even the words were painful. It was the affirmation. The knowledge that after everything they were still blind to their mistakes. They continued to portray themselves as the victims in a narrative that I had no desire to create. The next day, I revised my will, took all of my family members off of the beneficiaries list, and established a new trust that would fund first-generation college student scholarships. Silently, there are no structures or plaques bearing my name. Just something practical, something tangible. I changed my phone number the same week. New carrier, new account, new phone. Only my best buddy Sam, my lawyer, and my assistant were given the number. It was Sam who brought 2 six-packs and a bag of tacos over that evening. He remained silent, asked if I wanted to watch something that wasn't about family, and then offered me a drink. We watched an outdated action film with predictable explosions and awful dialogue. It was flawless. The knock on my door came at that moment. I had no expectations, no deliveries, no appointments. I went to check on the people while you did the TV, Sam. Jenna was the one. Hair secured. She has dark circles beneath her eyes. She held her phone tightly in one hand. In the other was what appeared to be a folder. She didn't appear upset. She appeared exhausted. The door was not opened by me. Softer this time, she knocked. I just want to talk, Brandon. I stood behind the door and watched her. Not talking, not moving. Then she said it. It has to do with Dad. Something took place. A gentle knock again, then a softer one. In Kevin's backyard, he fell off a ladder. He's okay. Bruised ribs and a sprained wrist. He's afraid, though. He's requesting you. I remained silent, not by way of the door, not in my mind. I wasn't cold in my silence. Clarity was the key. I was no longer the anxious, eager to please son. I didn't feel guilt surging up or some compulsion to rush to his side and fix everything. I just felt curious. I was wondering what angle this was. Curious if they still thought this was a game of leverage. I know we messed up, Jenna said after a long pause. I know you don't trust us. Maybe you never should have, but he's asking for you, Brandon. Not Kevin, not even Lisa. You. I finally opened the door, not because she said the right thing, but because I was ready to look her in the eye. And when I did, I saw it. Not manipulation, not a properly rehearsed script, just fatigue. And maybe a shard of comprehension. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her voice when she spoke again was rough. He stated he wanted to apologize. I gave a nod. So let him. She seemed bewildered. To you, Brandon? Not in a group SMS. Not through me, to you. I went outside and slammed the live door behind me. Didn't ask her inside. She gave me the folder after we stood on the porch for a minute. I opened it. A note in Dad's blocky, uneven handwriting was inside. It was brief. I'm not very good at saying the correct words, Brandon. Not at all. I am aware that I have relied too much on you. Too much was expected. I also realize that I never truly gave you the gratitude I deserved. The slack was always taken by you. And by pretending it didn't matter, I made it worse. I allowed others to belittle you. I occasionally joined in. I'm responsible for it. I apologize. None of it was fair to you. I hope you're content right now. Dad, you deserve to be. I waited to feel anything as I stood there reading it again. Anger, verification, sadness. But I just sensed the reality of it. Although it wasn't flawless, the apology was sincere. Jenna gave me a glance. Did you decide not to call? Claimed that he assumed you would hang up if he phoned. Block him if he texted you. She was not mistaken. She went on, I'm not here to guilt you. I wanted to let you know that he's making an effort. I gave a nod. Gave the folder back, closing it. Inform him I received the letter. Would you like to know? Slowly, she nodded once more. Also for the first time in a long time. She didn't dispute. Okay, she responded simply, and made her way back to her vehicle. The following day, I saw her drive away. I mailed Kevin a little package. There was a post-it note and a laminated copy of the letter. I appreciate the letter. We're through, but I accept your apologies. Be careful. I didn't require anything more. I would not return. I didn't require any staged forgiveness. Arc a tearful reunion or a dramatic confrontation. I had no desire to gradually reintegrate them into my life, one text at a time. The chapter was closed. I choose to spend the ensuing months creating something greater instead. I formally opened the scholarship fund I had established and named it after my grandpa, who bequeathed me the dramatizing mansion. I paid for the first 3 students' debt-free community college educations. We met and spoke with them, provided them with the type of assistance I wish I had received when I was their age. I had always wanted to visit Portugal, but I kept putting it off till later, so Sam and I did just that. For the first time in decades, I felt as I stood on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, as if I were no longer holding my breath. I sold the family home at a respectable profit and used the proceeds to invest in a small nonprofit incubator for first-generation business owners. I also purchased a tiny condo in the city. None of it was aired by me. Didn't publish anything online. I kept my family in the dark. After the voyage, I only lived for a year or so. That never took place. A letter arrived in the mail, no address for return. There was a picture of a photo dad with a cast on his chair arm, grinning clumsily at the rear camera. We still speak about you, it stated. Lisa finally learned how to make the stew you enjoyed. She always burns it. I figured you'd like that. All right, I grinned but didn't answer. There was no closure. Those words must also be definitive. Freedom was what I received. Freedom from constantly being the fixer and the helper. The emotional trash can. Freedom to decide who may and cannot access me. I never lost interest in them. I just stopped allowing them to treat me like a disposable object. They can accept the repercussions, and at last I began life according to my own terms.